For us, field inventory has 4 main characteristics. Right? The first one is that field inventory is very close to the customer, very close, or even at the customer. So in some cases, we can consider field inventory as being consignment stock, but it can also be stock that is within the day close to the customer. That's one aspect that characterizes field inventory. The second aspect that characterizes field inventory is that very often it is dispersed over many locations. The third aspect is around availability. In most cases, companies keep field inventory because they are searching for an immediate availability. So some companies, some of you probably use field inventory as a way to sell products very quickly to customers. In other occasions, be it repair or be it other operations that are done, the field inventory is there to allow technicians or to allow specialists to do an operation in the field very quickly with the parts that they have immediately available. Everything we will talk about today is around inefficient use of inventories or inefficient use of field inventory. The first thing we probably think about is inventory value. So working capital requirement, you have a lot of cash that is blocked in often low rotating stock. So we have inventories in many locations, and there is quite a high investment in those different locations. If we talk about field inventory on sometimes slow-moving items, companies also come to issues with obsolescence, obsolete stocks, so stocks that cannot be sold anymore. Peter will also talk about shelf life at some point. If we manage items where the shelf life is limited, then of course the obsolescence becomes even more important. So obsolete stocks leading to write-offs, leading to scrapping costs potentially. So both cost and balance sheet impact because we have this large quantity of diverse inventories in the field. What is remarkable is that in quite some environments, even if we have very high stocks and quite a high investment, that still we come to situations where there is availability below target. So we still hit shortages at certain moments in time, where our ambition to have that inventory available immediately is not reached. And what we see then as a last symptom is that field networks find solutions for low availability, but they find those solutions at a very high cost. So they start disorganizing. They come to situations where they will pass in an urgent mode inventory from the one to the other. They will borrow each other's stock. We will do rush orders. Maybe we will buy locally parts that we can use in a repair operation, but at a completely different cost than the usual cost. So even if we have a lot of cash blocked, leading to investment, leading to write-offs, we still see availability that is not perfect and induced costs related to non-availability. This is typically what we find in terms of symptoms. We would like to check with you what the main symptoms are for you. What are the challenges that you have if you look at these different types of issues? So let's share the results quickly. Probably see also, so 60% of you see as biggest issue having the right product at the right place at the right time. So availability is indeed often the biggest issue, with an obsolescence as a distant second, and investment as a third. So around these pains, we have tried to list what we think or what we see as the main causes of inefficiency. The first cause is field inventory is what I called a lot of small fishes, right? It consists very often of many small stocks, right? And that creates specific challenges. The first challenge that we see is that there are a large number of stock keeping units. So even if each inventory point has a limited number of products in stock, if you take those items in stock and you multiply by the number of locations, you have a lot of stock keeping units to manage. And that means that manual approaches become extremely cumbersome, right? Need a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of effort, just because there are so many of them, right? The second aspect is that for each stock keeping unit, the inventory value is rather low. And as a result of that, making optimizations in the sense of I look at the 20% of the items that represent the biggest values or that represent the biggest issues is difficult. So every improvement that you make, and that's then the third aspect, every individual improvement you make is almost invisible. You cannot just make a few big improvements and be ready. Right? So it is always about details. It's a few parts here, a few parts there. So all of the work to do to optimize those field inventories on a detailed level become cumbersome just by the volume that you need to treat. The second challenge that we often see in field inventories is that it's inventory that is not managed by inventory management professionals. And that also leads to consequences. If you look at who manages those inventories, very often field inventory is managed by specialists in their domain. Right? Be it people who are specialized in sales, so their main competence area is selling products, or it could be technicians whose main competence is repairing things, right? Or engineers, maybe even people in the health world. So their ambition and their competence is curing people, is helping people, is making people healthy, right? It's not managing a supply chain. And what is more, these people's ambitions are not even to manage a supply chain. Right? Their key role in their head, in their mind, is to solve problems, is to help customers, is to help patients. But still, we ask them to manage a supply chain. Right? And quite naturally, because of that, supply chain does not get the highest priority. And that goes even a little bit further. Very often, field inventories are very much focused to availability because compared to other inventories, the impact of a shortage exceeds the value of the product itself. So if we look at each part in field inventory, each product in field inventories, the values can be rather small. We often see that each part in itself is not a huge investment. Right? However, for the people in the field, the impact of missing a part can be much more important than the value of the part itself. And that creates even a stronger bias towards hoarding parts, right? Making sure that the fact of not having enough feels much more important than the effect of having too much inventory.
There's a fourth main root cause, Luc, for inefficient use of field inventory, which is that traditional techniques, traditional solutions for inventory management are insufficient. Let me give you two examples. One is around how you distribute your stock. In a situation like here on the slide, where you have an overstock in point B, in a field location point B, and you have a shortage or a need in point C, what you'll typically see is that traditional distribution resource planning solutions, they order in from point A to replenish to point C without really considering the excess stock you have in point B. And even if that creates a need in point A, you'll order from point A, replenish A and A to C, still ignoring the overstock in point B. But in field inventory, where you have overstock, where you have slow-moving codes, you really want to move your excess stock in point B to point C. And that can be either via reverse logistics, bringing it back to your DC in point A, and then moving it to where you have the need, or even directly from point B to point C, but of course, by checking the quality, doing the proper system transactions, so you know always where your inventory is. But on top of the challenge here of traditional techniques, by only having option 2 or 3 in our traditional solutions, you also run a risk of expiry obsolescence, because by ignoring your excess stock, you run a risk of at some point having old technology running into shelf life constraints. And by option 4 and 5, you can also include those considerations by rebalancing your stock. Secondly, what traditional techniques also lack typically is the ability to incorporate specific business and product knowledge. The closer you are to the customer, and that's by nature in a field inventory situation, the closer you are to the customer, the more specific logic applies to managing and planning your stock. I'll give you 3 examples. One is around product connections. Medical device companies typically work with consignment at a hospital, and in a surgery, for example, a knee replacement surgery, what you need is only a few parts, but the surgeon wants backup parts at his disposal in case complications arise. You rarely see usage of those backup items, but they need to be there. You need certain products with the others. Those connections are really business specific, really product specific, and are typically not factored in standard solutions. The second consideration, a second piece of logic is actually around customer requirements. You might face contractual obligations to keep minimum amount of stocks on site, or there might be service level agreements that force you into placing stock in closer to the customer. So really customer requirements, but also customer preferences are difficult to plan for. And what can happen in a field inventory situation is that a customer, a retailer, for example, wants to have two similar product ranges in his shop, for example, although you as a supplier only wants to target on your latest range. But the customer really wants to have also the latest season, the season before at his disposal, and you'll need to take that into account. Thirdly, there are also competitive threats that add a certain dynamic to managing field inventory. Imagine a situation where space is limited. My hospital example, my retailer, for example, space is also limited. As a supplier, you want to claim as much space as possible on the shelves of your customer to really literally push out your competitors. And that is, again, very customer specific and is difficult to plan and model with our traditional techniques.
So here you can select more than one. So the question is, what are for you the main causes of inefficient inventory, field inventory that is in your company? So what we see is probably close to what we expected with our availability. Pressure, of course, on availability is much higher than on inventory. That corresponds with what we saw before. And then also indeed moving inventory from one location to the other is a challenge. Key success factors. So we also have identified 4, say, key success factors for efficient use of field inventory. Step 1 for me is simple, automated, and reliable processes. Right? Coming back to the point that we are probably working with people whose main objective is not managing inventory, but is doing sales, solving customer problems. It's important that we realize that somehow they have a choice, right? I mean, supply chain is not their main activity. So if you give them the choice between something a way of working that is easy to follow, and a way of working that is complex, that takes time, that takes mental effort, etc., people logically have a tendency of choosing the easy way, right? If the easier way is the undesired way, right? And in fact, what we want them to do is more complicated than what we do not want them to do, then logically we will see undesired behavior arrive, right? Discipline is an extremely energy consuming activity for humans. So the main question then is, in terms of processes and also in terms of supporting tools, is how can we make the desired behavior easier than the undesired behavior? How can we make a process that is so simple that even people who have their main objective somewhere else follow it, just because it's much more easy to follow the process than not to follow it. Right. First, the first leverage we have there, I think, more and more, is making processes or making systems almost autonomous. Right? Make it in such a way that people even don't have to think about the process, but that the process runs for itself. Right? So a lot of technical solutions exist today, for example, to log consumption of parts automatically. A second step could be automation, right? So still, it's not completely autonomous, but instead of needing a lot of manual steps, I automate the process. Right? And then the last one, even if we need manual steps, make them as easy as possible.
Next to that, mirroring the pain that traditional techniques don't include specific business and product knowledge, we believe that one key success factor is to build custom and business-driven analytics. Yeah, we've seen that product connections or customer requirements and so on are not really factored in. I think it goes that far to say that the algorithm is actually subordinate to your understanding of the products, the processes, and the business. You really need deep understanding of how your operational processes work, how the products are connected, how the business works, before you can really start any analytics and have a discussion on the right algorithm, the right mathematics even. I'll give you two examples. One is for a company I worked for. I once saw an external data science team coming in to do a business case on whether to consign products or move them into a proximity stock location. And they knew very little of the business and the products. And what happened? They found a significant value, a significant business case in moving the stock away from consignment back to a proximity stock location, a local warehouse, instead of consigning. But what happened? They considered each part individually, while actually, if you know the products, you'll know that these products are sit together in a small box. So you cannot consider your products individually. You need to look at them box by box, because that's how they travel throughout your supply chain. And when you actually consider that, the business case really evaporated, because as soon as you make a decision to consign for one part, you need to consign the entire box, including the slow-moving parts. A second example on this one here is, for example, if you want to use analytics to determine how much stock you need, you probably start from your demand, like historic sales or consumption. However, if and where and when you can see that consumption really depends on how you do business. And it can even vary within your company, because by nature, field inventory is fragmented. So you might see very different processes, that very different practices in each location. For example, if you use a expensive part in an intervention, how would you know you've used it? Does it generate a sale, or is it part of your service contract? Do you need to look at your replenishment signal, and does it actually exist so low in your network? The next tip we'd like to share around custom and business-driven analytics is to focus on rebalancing your field inventory. We believe there are two angles from which you can look at managing field inventory, or doing analytics to manage your field inventory. And one angle is really to focus on cleaning up your excess stock. You can determine where is your excess stock and try to reduce it, remove it. But the risk is that you really focus or that you spend a lot of calories in moving around stock that is already obsolete. All technologies, products where you don't have demand for anymore, you won't be able to use at another location because you're really focusing on the excess that might be there already for years. While this could have a good impact on your balance sheet, you reduce your inventory, you might see a bad guide for your P&L. You won't see it as generating your sales because it's not used anymore, but you also probably need to take the cost of writing it off. But that is one angle, cleaning up your excess. The other angle is to approach it from preventing unnecessary investments. What does that mean? You really want to avoid that you invest in products where you already have excess. By doing that, you it's a double win. You don't manufacture the products anymore, so you don't need to spend the money, the capex to manufacture the products, but you also move your excess products to a place where you can use it. Of course, this strategy also has its challenges. Why? It's very difficult to take that into your planning exercises, because using your excess stock as a source of supply, you need to have certain predictability around that. You want to know when will you be able to pull it back from that location? What will be the quality? Do you need to do any repackaging? And when will you be able to deploy it again to the location in need? Two approaches, they go hand in hand, but just here to emphasize that you need to avoid spending too much calories and cleaning up the mess from the past while still flooding your field with inventory that they don't need. Okay, next up, the third success factor is around aligned targets. And what that means is, first of all, you'll need to segment smartly to really build your inventory strategy. And you can segment around 3 dimensions: classic, demand, supply, service, to build your service level, to build your inventory strategy. For example, if you are really flexible around your service agreement, you have a 72-hour window to replenish, but your supplier, so the supply side, is at the other side of the world, that really determines how you, where you put your inventory, how you build your network. To add a little bit more detail to that, we have this table here on the right that shows potential segmentation on your demand dimension and your supply dimension. When you look at demand, so those are the columns, you'll see that you might have an immediate need. So you need to be able to replenish in the next hour, the next few hours, or you might have a need that is planned, you know it in advance, or an unplanned need, but it's possible to wait for another day, another few days. This in combination with segmenting your supply side determines how you build your network. On the supply side, I highlight the second row there. If you have a low flexibility in your supply side, but the cost of missing a part is very high, so I lose the sales, I miss the intervention. If the cost is very high and the need to replenish is really immediate, you'll be inclined to put a lot of stock very close to the customer. So that's driving that strategy. However, if the cost of missing a part is very high, but your need is planned, when it's planned and it's even very variable, so you don't know how much you need to replenish, that drives you more towards placing your stock into a warehouse, a more central warehouse, so you can bring it in when needed. You know it because it's planned, but to deal with the variability, you probably need to put it again further upstream in your network.
And once you have that logic and you agree on that logic, the next thing indeed is then to come to a process to align on the inventory planning itself, to align on what is the inventory and the investment that I will make, right? And I think many of us know sales and operations planning as a general process, as a process that looks at capacity requirements, etc. But I think you can reuse that same logic of balancing or looking at what happens in the market, what do I have in terms of constraints, to take inventory decisions and then come to some kind of a sales inventory and operations planning. And what would that process do? Well, it would take a number of decisions that are specific to the inventory investment itself. Meaning you could decide or redecide for segments what your service target is. You could decide which items you will be moving from a central position to a local position, or from a local position back to a central position, right? Agree on the replenishment strategies, agree on how do I treat anticipation stock. So if you have seasonal products, at some point you will need to decide whether you keep the inventory you build for the season, whether you keep that inventory locally, or whether you would push it out into the field, right? So also that decision is a decision that is very important for the speed of service, but of course also for the obsolescence risk, right? Especially if you don't have a smart way of, or an efficient way of rebalancing once the inventory is in the network. Storage capacity, allocation rules, etc. What do you need to take those decisions? Well, you'll need, of course, market information and supply information. So market information you would need in your process is the market strategy, right? And especially changes in the market strategy, right? Are we changing the way we want to approach the market? Are we changing the product portfolio and the importance of certain parts of the product portfolio? But of course, you will also take into account supply characteristics, changes in terms of supply. If you know that there are evolutions in how your suppliers work, in their reliability, in their responsiveness, the speed at which they can respond, right? You would need to see that in the way that you treat the inventory and the inventory investment. Of course, in sales, inventory, and operations planning, typically you will do all of this while taking into account some kind of a global inventory target. Then there is still building the trust of people that actually the system is running well and that they will not run short, right? There is a lot of sensitivity around availability, right? So to cover or to respond to that sensitivity and uncertainty around availability, you can work on visibility. Visibility is, first of all, setting clear rules, making clear what the field can expect, right? If I promise, what do I promise? Do I promise that inventories will be replenished within 24 hours, will be replenished every week, have a reliable and clear set of rules? Right? Next to that, there is making upstream inventory visible, right? What can the field expect? In the logic of what you see is all there is. If I see that I have no inventory in my field location, I assume that there is no inventory, even if there might be inventory. As long as I don't see it, I don't believe it, right? So by creating visibility through the network, we can help people in the field to be more confident that the system will work and that the system will work as they expect or as they hope that it will work, right? Which brings us to these four levers: simple, reliable processes, aligned targets that can drive smart, custom, business-driven analytics, and then a system that allows you to create visibility on the rules, on the way that the system will work, and on the inventory that is available upstream, so that there is enough confidence that the system will actually deliver what it promised.